What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo Fantasy Football YouTube channel. And we are going through division breakdowns, every division in the NFL. We have two down, and today we're going to be talking the AFC West. To do it with me is Nick Lepri. You can follow him on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. Nick, we have a fantastic division to talk about, maybe the best in football. What are you thinking today?
Yeah, the AFC West, in my opinion, is the best division in football. These are four teams that, in my opinion, all maybe if they were in different divisions, could end up winning any given division in the AFC, especially if you put these teams in the NFC, because the NFC is a little bit softer. But these are four excellent teams. And while it's pretty improbable that four teams could make the playoffs from the same division, if there ever was a division for it to happen here, it would be the AFC West. And my favorite part of this video is going to be discussing the Kansas City Chiefs later on, because it seems like people have really moved their opinion on the Chiefs. It seems like everyone was a huge fan of the Chiefs. You know, they're going to win the Super Bowl. They're going to be back in the playoffs. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And now they're people that are just projecting the downfall of the Kansas City Chiefs. So, going to be very interesting to see how you feel, how I feel. Same thing with the comment section.
Yeah, and honestly feels like that changed so drastically after Tyreek Hill left, who's just one player.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about the Chiefs in depth. This is widely regarded as the best division in football. We're going to hit on win totals, coaching changes, player personnel moves, and you're going to see why this division is just so good. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. What do you say we kick this off with the Raiders? What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right. So the Raiders actually have the lowest win total in this division. It's sitting at 8.5, which is pretty ridiculous for this team overall. Their head coach, Josh McDaniels, he comes in from New England. He was the offensive coordinator for the Patriots since 2012, so a longtime OC there. He brings with him Mick Lombardi, who formerly coached the wide receivers for the Patriots, and they bring in Patrick Graham at defensive coordinator, previously coordinating the New York Giants defense. They do have quite a bit of personnel changes, especially on offense. And I don't think we can talk about the Raiders without starting with Davante Adams in the huge trade they made to acquire him. So talk to me about the Raiders as a whole. What does Davante Adams do to this team?
Yeah, the Raiders are one of the more interesting teams in the NFL, even before Davante Adams getting there, because they were so close to not even making the playoffs last year, right? We saw that game up against the Chargers. There was talks about them both tying to both get in the playoffs. There was all of that last year, but none of that ended up happening. The Raiders win the game. They go up against the Bengals, and things don't go well there. But the Raiders were a pretty solid team last year, even without a head coach with the quote unquote caliber of what people assume Josh McDaniels is going to be. So now they bring in Davante Adams, who you can argue might be the best wide receiver in the NFL. I know some people say Cooper Kupp. Some people will be like, oh, maybe it's Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. There's a bunch of names you can bring up, but Davante Adams is certainly one of those. I think with the offense that they have set up, now I don't think they have the most elite defense in the NFL, but with the offense that they have set up of Derek Carr, they have Darren Waller, they have Hunter Renfrow, and now they bring in Davante Adams. They could legitimately be one of the best offenses in the NFL. Now, I understand that Davante Adams quarterback going from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr, that's definitely a step down. But if we're talking about fantasy football, which we will be talking about a little bit later, I don't think that shift from Rodgers to Derek Carr would greatly affect his fantasy value as well as his real life output. I think Davante Adams could easily dominate with the Raiders. And I think that Josh McDaniels as the head coach is really going to be helping out this offense a ton.
I think you're right there. It's pretty remarkable what this team was able to achieve with an interim head coach making the playoffs. And considering all the wasted first round picks they had in recent years, this team winning 10 games was a pretty remarkable feat. I mean, you remember the drafts, I'm sure, with Cleveland Farrell, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Abram, none of whom had their first round options picked up. Henry Ruggs, obviously, that was a tragic situation. And even players like Damon Arnett, like they don't have any of their first round picks outside of like a Colton Miller who actually plays for this team. So what they've been able to do late in drafts, getting guys like Max Crosby, receivers like Hunter Renfrow, and picking up solid contributors like Darren Waller, it's pretty remarkable. And that brings me to their roster as a whole. You mentioned a lot of the players already on the offensive side of the ball. I think they've certainly upgraded. My only question is, do they play a similar style of offense? Last year, they were pretty pass heavy and quick, but they moved to Josh McDaniels, who's kind of blended his offense to the player personnel. And last year, they were particularly run heavy in New England. When we look at the players they brought in on defense, you have solid options like Chandler Jones. They re-signed Max Crosby. They're pretty solid up front, too. The only concern I really have is on the back end, where you're relying a lot on Trayvon Mullen, who's the guy they overdrafted, and Rocky Sin, who they bring in from free agency. So that's the only concern, especially when you're dealing with Herbert, Mahomes, and the other studs in this division. Can they keep up, especially if their secondary is a little bit weaker? But what do you make of the team as a whole?
Yeah, as a whole, I think this is a very solid team. Again, kind of like you said, I think that the offense is what really carries the show here in Las Vegas for the Raiders. I think that Max Crosby is a great player. I think that they have a bunch of solid players on defense, but at the end of the day, when you have an offense with a tight end who most people would consider a top three potential tight end in the NFL, when you have one of the best wide receivers, and then you have a wide receiver in Hunter Renfro, who a lot of people seem to have a lot higher of praise of right now compared to at the start of last season. I think that the offense is what's really going to be carrying it here. And like you said, offensively, I think we might see a little bit more Josh Jacobs than people are going to be comfortable with. Now, they didn't pick up his fifth year option, but I think that this team is going to be more run heavy, kind of like the New England Patriots would be when compared to what we're kind of used to with the Raiders offense. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't be drafting Derek Carr, that you shouldn't be high on the offense as a whole? No, but I do think that when we see Josh Jacobs potentially go crazy in 2022, that you shouldn't really be surprised because the team is going to be looking to run the ball at a little bit of a higher rate. I'm not saying they're going to be like top five rushing offense in the NFL, but I think that the pace of the rushing offense is going to be a little bit higher.
I agree with that. And I mean, you look at the roster behind Josh Jacobs. We'll talk about underdog fantasy in a second here, but I'm going to use their ADP for this discussion. Jacobs coming off the board at pick 61.2. We know he's not the best third down back, or at least previous head coaches hadn't used him in that capacity. But behind him, we're talking about Zamir White. I mean, think what you will of White. He's got a great athletic profile, but he never caught passes. He's still a late round pick. And then Kenyon Drake, who's getting older in his career and who's never been anything really more than a scat back either. So I think Josh Jacobs could be penciled in for a reasonable workload. And I like him at an ADP of 61.2. Adams, there really isn't much to discuss here. I think you take him when it makes sense in the first round. He's coming off the board at pick 10.4 on underdog. I like Renfro quite a bit at 85.9. I think he still operates in the slot, but I don't know. What do you think about ADPs for this team as a whole? Because for me, it's kind of just, I want players when they fall, when they hit their ADPs, or when their values. There's not really anybody I particularly want to take a stand on.
Yeah, I don't think that I kind of agree with that as well. I really think that Devontae Adams, if I'm at the end of the first round, I'm just going to take him right. I'm not super excited about him above a guy like maybe Stephon Diggs, who can get 2 picks later. But I do think that on a skill set standpoint, that Devontae Adams is more skilled. And I think that if this offense is passing a decent amount in the red zone, that Devontae Adams could be one of those guys that scores 10 plus touchdowns this season. When it comes to Hunter Renfro, he's a guy that I also like a little bit later. Now, he was a guy that honestly, his ADP didn't shift too much. It probably would have been in the 60s range if Adams did not get traded there. And that does kind of hurt my opinion of him because I wish you would be able to get him a little bit later, but he is so skilled. His route running is very, very good at the NFL level. I think he is one of the better route runners in the NFL. So I think that he's definitely worth a pick there. And like you said, while Kenyon Drake hasn't really been able to put it together, I think if you throw a late round dart on Kenyon Drake, if Jacobs was to get hurt, I think that Drake would take over as the lead back on the team, maybe. And I think there's a pretty solid chance, maybe like a 60% chance that that happens. So I'm willing to take the shot on Drake.
Yeah, they took Zamir White, but again, it's not really with the best draft capital. So I don't know. Those picks are kind of a dime a dozen. Some of them break out. People like to point to the James Robinson types, but just as many fail. Last thing I'll talk about is the win total here. It's at 8.5. I particularly like the under. You're playing against incredibly difficult competition in the AFC West. You face the NFC West in the crossover, and then you get the AFC South, who has pretty decent teams in the Titans and the Colts. The Raiders finished second place in this division last year, so it's not like they have a cupcake schedule for the one-offs either. You're going to get the NFC South where they get the Saints. The AFC East, that's going to give them the Patriots. And the AFC North, that's going to give them the Steelers. So this is by no means a cakewalk schedule. And there are other teams in this division, like the Chargers and the Broncos, that are going to draw cupcakes like the Falcons and the Panthers. So I'm going under the win total. Are you under or over 8.5?
I would go under as well. I'm very excited for the Josh McDaniels versus the Patriots game. I think that will be very fun. There'll be a lot of narrative around that game, so that's always exciting. But at the end of the day, I think the Raiders will probably get 8 wins. I don't see them getting like 5 wins or something and it going crazy under. But I think seeing them get 9, 10 wins is going to be very difficult in this division. Again, I don't think the Raiders are a bad team, but when you're in a division like this, when you're playing that second place schedule, that could really be the death of them. And like you said, they're playing the Saints. We might see a Saints team that has Drew Brees at the quarterback position, maybe. And I'm not even saying that's an upgrade from Jameis Winston, but the Saints are no schlubs. So this could be a pretty tough schedule for the Raiders. And I think the first year of Josh McDaniels may be a little bit more of a, not a disaster, but not what the team was looking for.
It's just a tough spot to play in. Love McDaniels. Long term, I like the team, but man, he's got it cut out for him this year. Next, we're going to move to the Chargers. I'm now realizing my run sheet's out of order here, but the Chargers are actually projected for 10 wins, which is slightly below the Broncos and the Chiefs. So we'll talk about the Chargers here, a team that should have made the playoffs. We just talked about in the previous discussion. They don't have any coaching changes. It's going to be the Brandon Staley regime. He retains both coordinators. They actually don't make a ton of noise on offense this offseason, but on defense is where we saw some really big signings. And I think they're going to be impactful right away. And the reason they were able to get a lot of these players is because of the rookie deal they have Justin Herbert on, but they bring in Khalil Mack and JC Jackson. Those are two all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber level talents. Now, the rest of their free agent class consists of players like Gerald Everett and role players, but man, you get two premier defenders in Khalil Mack and JC Jackson. You have to think that's an upgrade for the Chargers, especially where we saw them weak last year. What do you make of the roster changes?
Yeah, they got Khalil Mack for a half-eaten bag of potato chips, even though Khalil Mack isn't necessarily that guy he was a couple of years ago. Come on, like for what they traded for him, that was an absolute steal. I think JC Jackson is probably potentially top 5 at his position. He is really, really good. Now, maybe PFF or whatever type of metrics you're looking at isn't going to tell you that, but from the eye test, what I've seen out of JC Jackson, I think that he's very talented. And I think that Gerald Everett is even a step up from what they had with Jared Cook last year. I think that this Chargers offense, while it looks pretty similar on paper, the offensive line is definitely better. And I believe that Justin Herbert is going to take an even bigger leap. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be the best quarterback in the NFL, but I think he takes a solid leap up yet again. Justin Herbert is, maybe this is wrong to say, but I think he's the best quarterback in that class out of Tua, him, and Burrow. Jordan Love, obviously, we've barely even seen him, but I think that the LA Chargers are set up for success this season, and I'm surprised that their win total is lower, personally, than the Denver Broncos, because I think the Chargers might be the best team in this division.
They're also going to play an easier schedule. We talked about that with the Raiders. The Chargers finished third in this division. So unlike the Raiders, who are going to face off against the Saints, the Chargers get the Falcons. I mean, like just playing a third place schedule in your division, you're naturally going to get easier opponents. And when you look at other teams in the division, Vegas is telling us everything we didn't need to know. They view the Chargers as a better team than the Raiders right away. Outside of that, like this is a pretty complete roster. You look at the secondary, they added J.C. Jackson, but they already had Derwin James, Nasir Adderley, Asante Samuel. That's a lot of draft capital locks up in those players. You look up front, they already had Bosa. They already had Jerry Tillery, who they didn't pick up his option, but he's at least a decent role player they can use at this point in his career. And then, of course, they bring in Khalil Mack. And I love what they've done on offense. I mean, you look at their two most recent drafts, you get Zion Johnson this year and Rashawn Slater, perhaps the steal of the draft last year to protect Herbert. That was a major issue early in Herbert's career, is that he was taking a lot of sacks. No fault of his own. Offensive line was a sieve. Now you've added capable playmakers across the board, filling all those positions. So I like the Chargers a lot. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they win this division overall. But for fantasy purposes, and we'll talk underdog here, Keenan Allen's getting a little older. Mike Williams has been a situational deep play threat, but at times he completely disappears. Where are you willing to take some of these skill position players? I think my favorite's Eckler, but I'll let you talk about the entire offense from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, it's very telling on how good an offense is, at least in terms of fantasy, when all of their main guys are going inside the top 50 of drafts. Herbert is 46.8. Eckler is going in the top 10. Keenan Allen's going in the top 30. And Mike Williams is going in the top 40. So those are their main guys. And they're all going inside the top 50, which tells me that everyone is very confident in this offense. My favorite player, just like you said, is Austin Eckler. I've been a huge fan of Austin Eckler for years. Austin Eckler is one of the only running backs in my book that could easily surpass over 1,000 rushing as well as receiving yards. Now, this is one of those teams where when they have a premier running back like Austin Eckler, They're not like the Carolina Panthers where they realize that, hey, maybe we shouldn't give Austin Eckler 90% of the snap, right? Maybe let's ease it down for Austin Eckler so that he doesn't get absolutely eviscerated. Austin Eckler isn't this big guy, but when you put the ball into his hands, he is going to be very dominant. And I think that the team's game plan is going to continue to be to keep Austin Eckler as one of the bigger focal points in this offense. And I think that Austin Eckler could easily be the best running back in all fantasy football. I'm not going to say that I'm going to rank him at number one. I'm pretty sure Savoca hasn't ranked at number one, which is not necessarily crazy in my book. I have
It's
Jonathan Taylor
crazy.
at number one, but
It's crazy.
would you be surprised if Eckler was number one? I wouldn't be.
I think he needs injuries to get there. McCaffrey, if you have a healthy McCaffrey, he easily outscores him. But it's not crazy. And I mean, running backs get hurt at a higher rate than any other position. We see it year after year. With Eckler, and I think you already mentioned this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but he might not see 20 touches a game. It might just be 15 to 18. But those touches, they're coming in the receiving game, and they're the most valuable touches that a running back can have. Outside of Eckler, I'm willing to take a flyer on Spiller. I think he becomes the handcuff over players like Josh Kelly and Larry Roundtree. I also like taking flyers with Josh Palmer and Jalen Guyton. We saw them mix in a little bit, but I think Palmer in particular, who has the third round draft capital from a year ago, he could be a player that ascends. And if you get the number 3 as a late round stacking option with Herbert, I love that. Gerald Everett also kind of fits that bill. I don't think anyone's expecting Everett to play 100% of the snaps, but he's a receiving tight end and he's out there for the meaningful snaps with Herbert. Anything else to add on the skill position players?
Yeah, like you said on Josh Palmer, if Keenan Allen or Mike Williams were to get injured, I really think that Josh Palmer could have multiple games this season while one of them was out, where he finishes as a top 24 wide receiver. And I think that both Gerald Everett and Donald Parham are worth like your last pick, right, in a best ball draft. If you're talking about a regular fantasy football draft, then I don't really want anything to do with either of them. But in a best ball draft where, hey, maybe Donald Parham scores 4 or 5 touchdowns next season and he slots into your roster. Now, if you drafted like Travis Kelce or something, in my book, there's no real reason to draft Donald Parham or something like that. But if you waited on tight end and maybe you have 2 tight ends that you're unsure of, maybe you have Hunter Henry and Njoku, I think it's worth taking a late round final pick shot on one of those guys.
I agree. And I mean, we're talking like near the last round. None of the players we just mentioned in Palmer, Guyton, Everett, and Parham are going even inside the top 160 picks. So these are very much your flyers in your best ball manium type drafts. And speaking of which, we've teased it. Let's talk about Underdog. Underdog Fantasy, if you guys don't know, has all sorts of contests available to you guys. They have the best ball drafts that Nick and I have been mentioning, but they also have pick'em contests, live drafts, all sorts of contests you can take advantage of. And they just unveiled their Best Ball Mania tournament. It has a $10 million prize pool with a $1 million first place prize. It is just $25 to enter. And these drafts go on all throughout the summer. It's really turned the months of May and June into a far more exciting time of year for NFL fantasy drafts. And better yet, if you use the promo code Awesemo, you can get a match deposit bonus up to $100. We'll continue to talk about Underdog all throughout the summer with this ADP changes. But I can't wait to get into more of these drafts. Nick and I have already done a couple. I know you've done some with Savoca too. We're doing those on Mondays typically. Everything Underdog, so make sure to check them out. Any last words on the Chargers, or you want to move on to the Broncos?
Yeah, I think we did pretty good on talking about the Chargers. I am also somewhat interested in Isaiah Spiller, but I think his ADP is just way too high for if Eckler doesn't get hurt. Isaiah Spiller's not going to do anything.
Agreed. And last thing, I'm over on the win total at 10. What about you?
Oh, I'm over as well. I would be smashing the over. I think they could win 13 plus games. I
I
think
think
that
this
the
might
Chargers.
be, Vegas doesn't think so, but I think this might be the best team in the division. Is that a hot take?
No, I think they are the best team in the division, and I think they could easily be the best team in the AFC.
And I mean, we're talking really close win totals here. The Chargers are at 10, the Broncos are at 10.5, and the Chiefs are also at 10.5. Let's talk about the Broncos first. I think the Chiefs are just a better team, but obviously the market sees these as very close. Denver has the new coaching staff. They're bringing in Nathaniel Hackett, who's the Packers offensive coordinator. They bring in Justin Uten, who was the Packers tight end coach last year, and Ejiro Evero as the defensive coordinator. He was formerly the Rams secondary coach in 2021. He coached safeties before that. So entirely new regime, but similar to the Raiders, you can't talk about this roster without starting at Russell Wilson. They make the blockbuster trade. They bring him over from Seattle, and now he's in a far better situation. I like what Nathaniel Hackett's done in Green Bay. with Aaron Rodgers. So I think sky's the limit for Russell Wilson, and that's largely why this team is projected for 10.5 wins. Talk to me a little bit about Wilson and the roster as a whole.
Yeah, it was so funny when they brought in Nathaniel Hackett that it seemed like everyone was thinking, "Oh man, does that mean that Rodgers is going to Denver?" And then out of nowhere, I don't think anyone expected Russell Wilson to be traded, and then Russell Wilson joins up in Denver. I think that Russell Wilson is going to be one of the more interesting players in terms of just ranking for fantasy football because I've seen people rank him as top 5 quarterback, and I've seen multiple people rank him outside the top 12. I think last year, Russell Wilson kind of burnt a lot of people that Russell Wilson wasn't really the same guy he was a couple of years prior. And that was because Russell Wilson just was not running the ball really at all last year. And if that's the case in Denver, I don't think it will be. But if that is the case in Denver, then you can really make the argument that maybe Russell Wilson isn't as fantasy relevant as he used to be. Now, is he still a good quarterback? Yes. But when we're talking about fantasy football, you don't necessarily have to be the best quarterback in the NFL to be great in fantasy football. A guy like Jalen Hurts, most people would not consider a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. But in fantasy football, that rushing upside is just so immense. I think that Russell Wilson is in the perfect spot to succeed in Denver. They have obviously Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. They have Tim Patrick. They don't have Noah Fant anymore, but they have Alberto, and then they have a great 1-2 punch at the running back position. My biggest worry here is where Javonte Williams is going in terms of fantasy. There is no way I'm taking Javonte Williams that high right now inside the top 2 rounds when I know that it's going to be a split share. There's just no way Melvin Gordon just leaves, right? He's just not going to be phased out unless he gets hurt.
Yeah, we got to get you on arguing with Savoca because him and I had a spirited argument about this in our running back rankings reveal. And we'll talk our best ball rankings a little later this week. So maybe we can hash this out then. But Savoca's point is it's a new coaching staff. We don't know how they're going to use Melvin Gordon versus Javonte Williams. My rebuttal is that Melvin Gordon was fairly efficient last year. No, he wasn't as efficient as Javonte Williams, but you don't re-sign a guy like Gordon to a contract that they gave him to just have him sit on the bench, especially with how often running backs are injured. But I think you touched on the skill position players very well. I think Jeudy and Sutton are still values with the influx of talent, Russell Wilson being the main contributor. But offense, I think their line is getting better. They've spent some pretty premium draft capital across the board. They take Quinn Meinerz last year out of a Division III school, Wisconsin Whitewater. He played really well. Bowles actually has improved. Reisner's improved too. They have Lloyd Cushenberry out of LSU, and they have Graham Glasgow, who came over for Detroit. On defense, it's not probably the defense the Chargers have, but it's not too far behind. People remember the Von Miller days, but they actually have a pretty good edge rushing group without him. They brought in Randy Gregory. They're still getting Bradley Chubb, who suffered the severe injury a few years ago, but he's returning to form. You have Nick Bonito, one of the most prolific pass rushers coming out of the draft. They were able to get him on day 2. And then in the secondary, you have Patrick Surtain, who played immediately at an all-pro level last year. They have Darby there. K'Wan Williams, think what you will of him. But even at safety, Justin Simmons, he's a Pro Bowl caliber player. So you're talking about some premier playmakers across the board. I like what Denver has as a team. Is there anything else you want to add just from a roster building perspective for this team?
Yeah, like you said, the Denver defense is a little bit underrated compared to what a lot of people would think. Now, like you said, this is not the Denver defense of, was that like 10 years ago almost at this
But
point?
when they carried Peyton Manning to a Super Bowl?
Yeah, I wish Brock Osweiler won the Super Bowl, to be honest with you, because he was playing better than Peyton Manning that season. I digress. That's not important at all. But Denver Broncos this year, I am very interested in. In terms of the win total, 10.5 seems like a lot. I honestly think I would go under on the Broncos. I think they'll win like 9 or 10 games. What do you think?
Win total is interesting for this team because they finished last. So I mean, they're playing the Jaguars. They're playing the Panthers. Like
Yeah.
the Jaguars. Every team in this division plays the Jaguars. So excuse me there, but I mean, still, you're playing the Panthers. When you look at some of the other teams, they're playing the Jets and their crossovers. I mean, they get some pretty bad teams. I don't think they're better than the Chiefs. I don't think they're better than the Chargers, but this is probably one that's just a stay away from me, to be honest, because you do play one of the easiest schedules in this division, but they're going to cannibalize each other. And I think with the extra half win, 10.5 versus 10, like there's not even an opportunity for a push there. So I think it's just a pass for me. But man, it's tough not to like the schedule they play comparatively. But anything to add on that?
Yeah, it's really just tough as a whole because when you see a team with this much skill offensively as well as defensively, you just want to take the over, especially with how good Russell Wilson has been in the past. But I agree. Maybe instead of going the under, I'd probably just stay away because if they won 11 games, I wouldn't be surprised. If they won 9 games, I wouldn't be surprised. And like you also said, this division is very tough. These are going to be 6 very hard fought games. And if Denver goes just 3-3, they could be in a very bad situation.
Yeah, man. And that's like where the difference between drawing the Panthers versus drawing the Buccaneers is going to be huge because you've a tightly contested division, but you're the team that gets the Panthers versus getting the Buccaneers. Like that's a
Yeah.
big advantage. And it goes across the board. Like you're the team that plays the Jets versus playing the Bills. And that's what we're going to be talking about with the Chiefs right now because they're playing the first place schedule after they won the
Yeah.
division last year. And now they're facing off against their own division. They play the NFC West and they're getting the first place teams from all those aforementioned divisions. It's going to be tough for the Chiefs this year, but you teased it earlier. People don't view this as a Super Bowl caliber team, at least a lot of people now. And I think it's largely just because of Tyreek Hill. When you look at their roster, it's not all that different from last year. You just lose the premier playmaker there. Their offensive line is still solid, and I think it's improved a lot. You have Orlando Brown. They had the blockbuster trade for him, but they swung and they hit Creed Humphrey in the second round last year. He's a solid player for them. On defense, you still have some pretty solid players overall. No, they don't have Tyrann Mathieu, but they take George Karlaftis in the draft this year. Chris Jones is still there. Frank Clark is still there. They have some premier draft capital at linebacker. They took both Willie Gay and Nick Bolton in recent years. If you look at their secondary, it has some premier players. L'Jarius Sneed was a day 2 pick that played awesome for them in the secondary. Juan Thornhill, Justin Reed. It's a pretty solid team overall. But again, that Tyreek Hill loss is massive. They've tried to mask it kind of by committee. How big of an impact is that going to be for the Chiefs this year?
Yeah, I honestly don't think that it is going to be that impactful for the Chiefs as a whole. Now, obviously, with the Chiefs, if you're a Chiefs fan, you want to have Tyreek Hill, right? You want to have that guy that can turn a 6 yard slant into a 99-yard touchdown, right? That's what you want on your team. But at the end of the day, it's not like they have these scrubs at the wide receiver position. It's not like they're rolling out some, like, it's not like they paid all that money like the Jaguars did to go ahead and get Christian Kirk, right? They still have a decent wide receiver core that they're not paying a shit ton of money to. So I actually think the Chiefs are pretty underrated right now. Now, 10.5 wins, maybe Vegas doesn't think that they're underrated, but in terms of public perception, it seems as though a lot of people think that since the Chiefs lost to the Bengals, they choked that game away. They lose Tyreek Hill. Now it seems like the earth is shattering for the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember last year, like 4 games in the season, people thought Patrick Mahomes was washed. People thought that Pat Mahomes didn't have it anymore because he had a bad start to the season. His bad start to the season is just average. So I think if Patrick Mahomes is playing up to his normal caliber, this team could easily smash over 10.5 wins. And in terms of fantasy football, the most interesting spot for them is the running back position with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Ronald Jones. CH is going at pick 85.1, Ronald Jones 127.2. I think that Ronald Jones could hugely smash that ADP and become the lead back there. I'm not saying he's going to be, but I think that when you go from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's drafted in like the first round, the second, the third round previously, and now he's getting drafted all that much later at pick 85, maybe there really is some value at Clyde Edwards-Helaire now that you know that you're not investing that very high draft capital into him in your fantasy drafts.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And you said it very well, so I won't labor that point. I am going to have a ton of Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year. Ronald Jones, I think, is fine too because he's coming off the board outside the top 120. So if you miss on Edwards-Helaire, I'm completely fine taking a stab on Jones. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. So if Jones is the guy that just falls in the end zone a few times, he should pay off that ADP too. Receivers, what I really want to touch on with these ADPs because you have Juju Smith-Schuster going well ahead of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore's kind of in the middle there. Juju's ADP is 57.5. They paid him as like a wide receiver 5. His contract is horrific. Now, as a talent, Juju Smith-Schuster had the phenomenal rookie season, and he steadily declined from there. But man, this contract has me very nervous with Juju. Like, MVS has a better contract than Juju. Is that any indication to you how they plan to use these players? Because with Juju inside the top 60, man, I'm just going to take a stab on MVS, Mecole, and Sky Moore later than take a stab on a guy that they're paying as essentially their water boy.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Looking at the contract could be very telling for a lot of these players on how these teams view the players. And go inside the top 60 when you're getting paid like how Juju Smith Schuster is. And with what we've seen out of Juju recently, you shouldn't be like jumping at the screen to draft Juju inside the top 60. Am I going to draft him a couple of times? Probably, right? Because I plan on doing a bunch of these drafts, and I want to make sure that I don't just completely miss on a guy like Juju, who I know deep inside of him, while he's been playing video games for the last years trying to become a Twitch streamer, he still has the same pizzazz he used to have, right? He's still that talented player. The question is, will he be able to be the clear number one guy there outside of Kelsey? I don't think so. And do you have anything to add on that, or could we talk about Kelsey real quick?
No, I talk about Kelsey. I love him. I think you look at a player that could assume a lot of those Tyreek targets. Kelsey is the most dynamic playmaker this offense has outside of Mahomes. I love Kelsey.
Yes, I love Kelsey as well, but are you comfortable drafting him? So his ADP right now is 12.7. Say he must be a first round pick. Are you comfortable pulling the trigger at the end of the first round on Kelsey? Because my thought process over the years has changed drastically on tight ends. Last year, I was very excited to draft Waller in the third round, very excited to draft these guys early, and I didn't feel super excited with the teams that I built with that strategy. So what do you think about drafting Travis Kelsey super early? Are you on board with it, or are you staying away?
If I'm at pick 12, I'll do it. I'm not taking him above his ADP because he's not going to go at pick 12 in every single draft. You're going to be able to get him at 13, 14, 15, probably not much further after that. But there are drafts where he'll slide a couple picks, and I'm just going to pluck him off there. Part of the reason is the depth of the tight end position. And you and I actually did our tight ends rankings reveal. It's
Yeah.
deeper than it's been in recent years. I think we have 5 legitimate guys that could finish inside as the number one tight end overall. And then you have players like Goddard, Schultz, Knox, even like a Zach Ertz, who could get into that top 5, and they're just drafted much later, like outside the top 5 rounds. So it's a deep position. I'm comfortable with Kelsey when he falls, essentially for the same reasons you laid out for Juju. You just don't want to be like hands off this Kansas City Chiefs offense. They have that league winning upside. But I also don't think you want to overdraft the tight end position in particular.
Yeah, I've seen drafts that I've been in where he goes like pick 7. There's just no way I'm willing to do that with all of the star running backs and receivers that you could be getting at that pick. I'm just, like you said, basically just at pick 12 or later is where I'm comfortable taking him.
Last one before we get out of here. Sky Moore. He's going ahead of MVS and Mecole. I want to ask you where you would draft Sky Moore and if you're comfortable with that ADP, because I think it's a little bit rich for a player with very late round 2 draft capital when you have the contract for MVS and Mecole, who hasn't necessarily performed to his draft position, but a guy that at least has rapport with Mahomes. He's coming off the board at 130. I think just for value, Mecole's probably my favorite, considering there's no bona fide wide receiver 1 in this offense. So talk to me about Sky and the other options behind Juju.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I think I'm just out on McCole Hardman. Now, it's not that I think that he can't do it, right? Pick 130. That's great value, but
Yeah,
it seems like
it's
he's
ADP to me, not Mecole. Like I don't think
yeah.
Mecole's a stud. It's literally just his pick is so late.
Yeah, it seems like he's one of those guys that every year is that value guy on the Chiefs, right? But maybe now without Tyreek Hill, we can really see what McCole Hardman is. I'm fine taking him at pick 130, but I know people will reach up. Oh, I got to get the Mahomes, MVS, McCole Hardman stack, right? They're reaching up to get these guys. And that would make me very nervous to do something like that. In terms of Sky Moore, like you said, I think 82 is a little bit too high for him. If he was going in the 100s range, I'd be pretty comfortable doing it. I'm not even sure where Sky Moore fits in this offense. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he was the number one target. And I wouldn't be surprised if some random wide receiver that we didn't even talk about in this video is able to eclipse him because of his draft capital and because he's so young. Now, maybe halfway into the season, Sky Moore is this crazy player, but I think instantly right off the bat, I think that people are going to be pretty disappointed with Sky Moore, especially if you're in a regular fantasy draft and you're taking him to be your, in a lot of fantasy drafts nowadays, people have like 3 receivers, 2 flexes. If he's your second flex, you might be very disappointed early on in the season.
Listen, this is the team that gave Byron Pringle the opportunities over Mecole. Like
Yeah.
they're not going to play somebody just because they were drafted early or because they had a big contract, whatever it is. They're going to put the best players on the field. That's been a staple of the Andy Reid regime. And there are some interesting late round guys that this team has taken flyers on, like Josh Gordon's still affiliated with the team. They took Justin Ross in the undrafted free agency period of the draft, a guy that a lot of people liked in the draft process. So you never know with the Chiefs, and you could just miss and they played the Byron Pringle types and he's not even drafted. But overall for win total, I think it's under for me just because they're playing the first place schedule in addition to the NFC West, their own division. It's going to be tough for the Chiefs. What do you think?
Yeah, I would not bet this, but I would lean towards the over. I think that the Chiefs are just that good where they have to play the first place teams in these divisions. They could beat the first place teams. They are still, in my book, one of the best teams in the NFL. And I think that what if they don't lose to the Bengals last year, they make it to the Super Bowl and they lose to the Rams. Do you still think that their win total is 10.5? Because I think if they make it to the Super Bowl, their win total is maybe 11.5, even with all the changes that happen.
Yeah, you're probably right. Ultimately, it's going to be a stay away from me. Favorite bet is Chargers over. Second would be Raiders under. But that'll do it for us. Let us know in the comment section what you guys think. Who's too high in this division? Who's too low? Do you think the Raiders can actually pull it off with Derek Carr as their quarterback now that he is Devontae Adams? He's Nick Lepri. You can follow him on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. You can follow me, Matt Gajewski, on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you again next time.